Howdy folks, Deacon Parsons here. For a few years now I've realized that the way my contemporaries and I define a traditional relationship is very different from how most of the rest of the world seems to define it. Both those that say they support traditional relationships and those who oppose them. Some months ago I got into a nice debate with Diana Davidson of Feminism LOL, which clarified for me that most folks consider traditional relationships to be female-centric. I don't believe this is accurate. I gave this a lot of thought and study, and I have concluded that it isn't just my age, but my geography and my demographic that have given me a unique perspective on this topic. In reviewing this, I think I may have stumbled onto some significant information, and I may have actually found the primary cause of feminism. This topic's too long for one video, so I'll be doing at least 4, maybe more. The first couple of videos I plan to present what I feel is the actual traditional relationship. Then I'm going to go ahead and explain in the third the roots of the pseudo-traditional relationship that has got mislabeled, and I'm going to redefine that as iconic. And after that I'll explain how industrialization morphed the traditional relationship into the iconic relationship, and how industrialization is actually the root cause of feminism. And I'm going to do this using some literature and my personal family history. Now, industrialization is generally considered to have begun in the 1790s in Britain. Most people consider that we've lived in a post-industrial culture for hundreds of years. And in some places, like the City of London, that might be true. I will show that full industrialization in the area that I grew up in didn't come about until and was driven by World War II. I'm from western Kansas. All 4 of my grandparents lived from the horse and buggy and 6 guns to the ICBM and the space shuttle. Essentially, they were young married couples with children living in a society that was about 5 to 8% industrialized and lived to see full industrialization in the space age. My mother and father were both in grade school before they lived in a house with running water, electricity, and indoor plumbing. They began life in a world that was about 8 to 12% industrialized and lived into the computer age. I am the first generation of my family to live a fully industrialized life. What happened to the world over generations happened in one generation where I grew up. This seems to have given me a unique perspective that I want to capture, and I want to put forth for consideration and for review. In this first video, I'm going to explain the roots of my definition of what a traditional relationship really is. To be considered traditional, something has to be passed down through the generations. To be traditional for a culture, it has to be the majority of that culture. Sometimes people fail to take this part into account. Something might be the goal of everyone in a culture, but not something that everyone in the culture participates in. Everyone wants to win the lottery, but that isn't the traditional way we make a living. The burial of Tutankhamun is a good example. King Tut's burial is not the traditional Egyptian burial. It may be the quintessential burial for a pharaoh, and is probably the iconic burial that every Egyptian aspired to have, but it is not the burial that most Egyptians received. But we know more about Tutankhamun than we do the run-of-the-mill Egyptian. Most of our history is like that. We know a lot about the top 1%, but very few historians and very few writers down through the ages have given us a good picture of the common people. So what are the roots of the traditional relationship? Well, let's begin with pre-civilized humans. We know from North and South American native peoples, African tribes, Australian aboriginals, that in most, if not all, hunter-gatherer societies, a basic division of labor developed among gender lines. Humans are a dimorphic species. There are important physical differences between males and females that play out when living in a Stone Age environment. Men's bodies are built for harder physical labors than women's bodies are. Women's bodies are built primarily to bear children. In general, a woman cannot do the same physical labor over time as a man can. Biologically, physical labor makes men more able to reproduce. Women, however, have a threshold of physical labor that once they pass, reduces their ability to reproduce. We see the effects of hard labor in the extreme by the skeletons at Herculaneum, where you can tell which female skeletons were Roman citizens and which female skeletons were slaves by the marks of hard physical labor left on the bones. They tell us also that hard physical labors of the Olympic female athletes actually gets their bodies to the point that they do not mense every 28 days. Now, the concept that men and women are different and can work at different rates was completely non-controversial and completely non-controvertible fact of nature up until the mid-20th century, after full industrialization had taken place. Now, you need to remember that pre-industrialization, everyone except the top 1% worked very hard physically just to survive. Just because the average female couldn't expend the same amount of labor that the average male could, didn't by any means indicate that the females had it soft. In a pre-industrialized world where all labor is manual, males did the dangerous and more physically strenuous work of hunting and protecting the group, while the females worked very hard preparing the food, growing gardens, making clothes, and in general, keeping the camp. Please note that these women were only weak in comparison to the men of their culture. The physical effort of a pre-industrialized woman would stove up your average citified man of today. And that isn't even taking into account all of the knowledge and skills that she possessed. This is the era where the fertility of the group was a survival factor, and the women and children first mentality took hold. Girl Writes What, Karen Strawn, has a wonderful video, The Disposable Male, about how in today's fully industrialized society, males are disposable. Now, I'm going to show how industrialization actually made women disposable first, but that'll come later. I submit that pre-industrialization, men weren't disposable, but they were expendable. Disposable insinuates a lack of worth. Expendable is a military term that describes the relative use of something in war. The difference between disposable and expendable is important. In the military, ammunition is considered expendable. It is also extremely vital. An army without ammunition isn't really an army, is it? In pre-industrialized societies, men were vital to the survival of the group, but if push came to shove, it was better for the group to expend men rather than women and children. The reason for this is quite simple. If there is strength in numbers, 1 woman and 10 men could produce 1 pregnancy per year. 1 man and 10 women could produce 10 pregnancies per year. To have large cities requires commercial food production. Civilization is based on grain crops, high-calorie food that can be stored and transported relatively easily. At this point, the difference between the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere teach us an important point. In the Western Hemisphere, maize or corn developed as the main grain crop. It did allow several civilizations to spring up and build huge cities of stone. But the Western Hemisphere lacked beasts of burden, and thus they lacked the plow. While in good years on fresh soil they could produce enough food, without the plow they could not increase production to the point that they could survive several lean years, nor could they ramp up production once the lean years had passed. To sustain multi-generational crop production is based upon the plow and beasts of burden. Now, I plan to do another video on the topic, but suffice it to say that with the addition of the beasts of burden and the plow, human males had to dominate and control not just herds of animals, but individual animals, often several times their size and strength. Success as a farmer is directly linked to human success in dominating and controlling beasts of burden. From the beginning of civilization until the Industrial Revolution, the vast majority of people were farmers. I submit that the traditional relationship is that of a farm family. The gender roles of hunter-gatherers worked well and were continued and reinforced by the switch from hunter-gatherer, then to herder societies, and finally to grain crop civilization. The necessities of human life are food, clothing, and shelter. As a homemaker, the woman produced, prepared, and preserved most of the food on the farm. The man was therefore freed up to use his labor on the commercial side of the family farm. It is important to point out that this relationship wasn't dictated by any human. It is the natural result of pre-industrial life and benefited both parties. It was neither female-centric or male-centric. It was, in fact, relationship-centric. It produced synergy. Each party, the male and the female, was better off in the relationship than outside of it. The realities of pre-industrial life reinforce the traditional relationship. The life of a pre-industrial farm family wasn't all that different by location. Ancient Egyptian, ancient Chinese, Mesopotamian, Greek, Roman, all of these followed pretty much the same template. Now I want to point out here that this developed without regard to any religious or any emotional aspects of the relationship or the society. These were just simply the facts of life and what people had to do to survive. Okay, we're going to end part 1 right here. As always, love your maker, love your mate, and do what's right because it's right, and devil take the hindmost.